Hello everyone, welcome to English with Shalini, and in this today's video we are going to discuss age of Chaucer, and its timeline is from 1340 to 1400 AD. So this is going to be a very important video. Please subscribe my channel. And this age of Chaucer comes under Middle English period, and Chaucer was a great poet here. He was a medieval writer and a great writer. And Chaucer lived during the time when there was a turmoil and changes going on in Europe also, and in England, especially in Europe. So there was a 100-year war was going on between France and England, and this was also period of Black Death, bubonic plague. So 100-year war was going on between England and France, and this lasted for 116 years, and this resulted in heavy taxation, which caused peasant revolt. Now there was a bubonic plague, which is also called Black Death, and this is caused by rats. It befell first in 1348 and it lasted to 1349. Now this bubonic plague spread in Europe in 1348, and this even caused lots of social problems. Thousands of people died in this pandemic. You can imagine the situation compared with the corona pandemic, how many people died in our country and in other countries. So it was a such situation, and here one third population of England died in this Black Death. And during this Black Death situation, people questioned God and church. Now, there was a peasant revolt because of 100-year war, and 100-year war was caused many troubles, and one of this trouble is peasant revolt, and this occurred in 1381. And this revolt or peasant revolt is also called Tyler's rebellion, because this was led by Wat Tyler. You must remember the name. This is asked in exam many times, who was the leader. Now here government declared heavy taxes on the poor peasants, and that resulted in this revolt. Now what happened? Peasants revolt broke out in this age, and peasants, the farmers, talked about a better life for themselves. They were living in a very bad conditions. They wanted proper wages for themselves, proper money for themselves. They were struggling under the heavy taxes of government. And Richard II was king at that time, and he was not sympathetic towards the poor at all, and he imposed um, he crushed them with heavy hands. So peasant revolt was crushed, but although it was crushed, uh, peasant revolt was very not very successful, but it brought a new ray of hope in the life of peasants. This revolt gave importance to common men and ordinary men. They now know that they could take a stand for themselves. Now, during this age, in 14th century, England was not English was not very important language. It was just not a literary language, and the rich people talked in French and Latin, and French and Latin were the important language. Aristocratic people and rich people of England used French language, and Latin was used by the church people or the clergies. Now, lots of literature was being written in French, and French was the language of prose, and while the poetry was being written in Latin, not in English at all. So Chaucer is being the great poet of this age. He earlier he chose romances of the France. Then he go through the Italian period. Then ultimately he came to English, and he chose it English language. So he is also called father of English language. So now vernacular literature were in the rise at that time, and it was coming into the prominence. English was coming into the prominence, and some of Chaucer contemporaries also wrote in English. at that time, just like Langland wrote, Gower wrote, and here John Wycliffe translated Bible into English. So this was age of great changes and turmoil. Now have a look on the Geoffrey Chaucer. Geoffrey Chaucer was a representative poet of 14th century, and he was born in 1340 during the reign of Edward III, and he was son of vintner. He was son of wine merchant, and it is said that he lived through three kings. His like Edward III, Richard II, and Henry IV. So now Geoffrey Chaucer was born in the reign of Edward III, and he lived through that of the Richard II, and he died in the year after Henry IV ascended to the throne of England. So he lived through this rule of three kings. Now his life thus covers a period of social contrast and political changes. There was a lot of political turmoils in the 14th century was there. Edward reign marked the highest development of medieval civilization. Chaucer belonged to the medieval period, and there was the highest development of medieval civilization during Edward third reign. And the spirit of court was that of a romantic idealism, and the rich people were enjoying the riches of the country. They were living in prosperity. England went forth on foreign conquest, but there was another side of this picture. There was a dark side of this picture also. King and his nobility led a very gay life, very aristocratic life, very loose kind of life, and trade expanded in England, in Europe. Wealth increased among the commercial classes of the country, but the masses sunk in the misery. Common men were suffering, and they were pestilence ravaged the land. Plague, Black Death swept away one third of the population of England. Famine followed plague. So there was one trouble after the other. Now, thieves were multiplying because they were having a very miserable life. The enormous cost of the French wars. There was a 100-year war going on between France and England, as I already discussed. So there was a very much cost of that war, and this enormous cost of the French war has to be met into the heavy taxation. So now government imposed heavy taxation upon the people of England, and there was a widespread social unrest. People were grooming and suffering under this taxation and their misery. Political troubles grew under the Richard II, because Richard II was a very unwise king. He was a despotic ruler. He believed in divine rights theory of king, and and the William Shakespeare has written a great play upon this Richard II, and it is very popular and is a kind of a tragedy. Then the constitutional conflict between the king and his subjects resulted in the endless discord and confusion, because Richard II wanted to crush people, crush peasant revolt, which was occurring at that time. Another evil of the Chaucer's age was the corruption of the church, and there was a very spiritual zeal and energy left in the country. So, clergymen and the churches of the England was corrupt at that time, and this can be seen in the Canterbury Tales, especially into the prologue to the Canterbury Tales by Chaucer. The greater priest heaped wealth. So priests were having wealth, and they lived in a godless and worldly way. And the ordinary clergy were ignorant and careless. So the prior were notorious and greedy. It was at the point John Wycliffe, the reformer, the morning star of the Reformation, he started his work. And his earnestment, he was a great man, and he gave the best of his life for reviving spiritual Christianity. Now he wrote religious pamphlets, and he sent his poor priest far and wide with the message of gospel. Now he produced a complex version and vision of the Bible. at that time. He translated Latin into English. He translated Latin Bible into English, which became very popular among the common people of England. Now, people themselves can read Bible and understand its teachings. The social unrest and the beginning of the religious movement were two active forces in England during that time, and in the later 14th century. A third influence came from the new learning. So there was a rise of new learning. Renaissance was going in Italy. The spirit of new learning had arisen in Italy. Renaissance has its birthplace in Italy, but its influences are coming to England slowly, slowly, and it was in full flowering in England in 16th century. So, new learning has risen in Italy, and chiefly from the renewed study of the literature of classical antiquity. The great leaders of the Great Revival were the two Italian French Petrarch and the Boccaccio. So, writer like Petrarch and Boccaccio was the great pillar stone of the Renaissance, which was rising in Italy, and it was through their work influence of humanism passed into England. So people were traveling to Italy, and they were reading these masters, and they were coming in contact to this contact of this master, and then they were imbibing the spirit of Renaissance in themselves, and they were carrying and they were taking this spirit into their country. So, uh, as you know that Chaucer was very fond of traveling. He traveled to many many countries. He traveled to Italy, and he imbibed this spirit of Renaissance in himself. And he was a diplomat also. He was going into various expeditions and diplomatic missions. Now, it is also said that Geoffrey Chaucer participated in 100-Year War, and he was caught by French army there, and he was such an important person that Edward III paid a heavy ransom for him, and he released Geoffrey Chaucer. So he was an important person at that time. It effect Now effect of Renaissance was shown in quickened sense of beauty, delight in life, and free secular spirit. So Renaissance is a great movement. I have made several videos on Renaissance. You can watch it, and then they began to appear in our literature also. Now, Chaucer's life. We will discuss about Chaucer's life. Geoffrey Chaucer is the greatest figure in English literature of the 14th century, and he has thrown all his contemporaries completely into shade. He has overshadowed his contemporaries, although they were two writers writing at that time. But Chaucer's genius was such that whole century is named after him. Although he lived only for 60 years, the whole 14th century is called Age of Chaucer. Now, he was born about 1314 in London. His father was a flourishing merchant vintner, and we know nothing about his childhood. At the age of 17, he received a court appointment, and then he became a valet in the king's chamber. Then he was closely connected with the court of England, and he was becoming an important person. He was a traveler. He toured to the continents and diplomatic missions, and he was thus brought into direct touch with the Italian culture. He especially made many tours to Italy, and he came in contact with Boccaccio and Dante and all those people. And he may even have met Petrarch and Boccaccio there. And then he fell on evil days. The grant of royal pension which he was receiving placed him beyond want, and now he died in the 1400, and he was buried in that part of the Westminster Abbey which came to be known as the Poets' Corner. You can see this is Chaucer's tomb in Westminster Abbey. And this Geoffrey Chaucer was the first poet and first great English writer to be buried in Westminster Abbey. So this is an important point you must remember. This is tomb of Chaucer. Now we will go to Chaucer's education. Chaucer's education as a poet was twofold. A part of it came from the literature, and part on it came from life. So he learned from literature also, from literary background also, and from the uh, life also. So he was a thorough student. He tell us how he would pour over his beloved volumes till he was dazed. He was a man of world and affairs. So not just a writer. He was not just a writer. He was a diplomat. He was going in many diplomatic missions. He had to travel a lot. He was head of the king's work, and so he was a very influential man, like Francis Bacon. Now he had traveled much, and he has experienced a lot of knowledge out of that, and he had seen life. He had a first-hand experience of life, and his relationship with the people of all sorts brought him into intimate relations with the people of all sorts. He had quick insight into character. He could understand character well, and he studied people. He was an observant man, and this observation and this all these things came into his use when he wrote Canterbury Tales. When he wrote tales in Canterbury's, when he described characters, which is which is also called like a picture gallery. Now, Chaucer's work in general, we will discuss it. Geoffrey Chaucer's literary career is divided into three parts and three periods. And his first is his French period, where had influence of French literature, and then his Italian period, then his English period. Now, his early works was done on French models. He studied French models, he translated them, and he translated Roman de la Rose, and he wrote an allegory on the death of Blanche, John of Gaunt's wife, called Book of Duchess. So, this John of Gaunt was Chaucer's patron also, and Chaucer's married John Gaunt's wife's sister. So, they were relative also. Now, as a result of his visit to Italy, French influence disappeared. So, Italian influence took him in this place. He wrote The House of Fame under the influence of Italy and Troilus and Cresside. So this was the under the influence of Italy, and House of Fame was a great work, and Troilus Cresside was a narrative poem. And this Troilus and Cresside was the subject upon which uh, William Shakespeare also wrote his work, Troilus and Cresside. And Chaucer wrote an unfinished legend of good women. Finally, he became English. It means that instead of being imitative and instead of becoming French or Italian, he became English. Influence of English became prominent in him, and he became independent, relying upon himself, relying upon his English language and his themes. And so, to this period belong the minor poems and the Canterbury Tales. So, in this age, in this time, he has written some minor poems also, and his magnum opus Canterbury Tales. Now it is Chaucer's most characteristic work. The Canterbury Tales is the best work in whole English Middle English period. The Canterbury Tales is a collection of stories. It is a collection of 24 stories, and a pilgrimage were very popular during 14th century. And the shrine of murdered Saint Thomas Becket is one of the favorite expedition or the pilgrimage spot at that time. So, a number of pilgrims on the eve of their departure, met at the Tabard Inn in Southwark near London. And Chaucer is also there on the same errand. He is also in the pilgrimage, Geoffrey Chaucer. So, there are 29 pilgrims plus Chaucer. Now, there was a host. There was host there in that inn, and the jolly host of the Tabard Inn was Harry Belly. And Harry Belly gives an hearty welcome to the all pilgrims. He welcomes them. Then he tells them that to pass the time and to beguile the tedium of the journey, because they have to take the journey of pilgrimage in the foot also, in the some horses also. So each member of the party had to tell two tales on the way to Canterbury and two on the way back. So, those who tell best stories will be given free supper after their return to Tabardin. So, suggestion is applauded and appreciated by all pilgrims, and the Canterbury Tales is the result of that. So, here he planned to write 120 tales, but he couldn't write so, and that 120 tales, because he died before that, and he could only finish 24 tales. Now, in the prologue, Canterbury of the prologue to Canterbury Tales, Chaucer introduces his fellow pilgrims. He describes uh, their uh, uh, their dresses, their figures, their clothings, and how they talk, how they appear. The military profession is represented by a knight. So there are military person like knight and squire. Knight is the old knight, then his son is a squire, and there is a yeoman who has come with square, and then there is a ecclesiastical person like a person belonging to a church, and there were by a prioress, a nun, a monk, a friar, a summoner, a pardoner, and a poor person also, and the clerk of Oxford. So now this clerk of Oxford, who is a student of divinity. So here clerk of Oxford doesn't mean that he was an official clerk of Oxford. Actually, he was a scholar of Oxford. He was a student of divinity. And then we have a lawyer, a physician, a number of miscellaneous characters. The prologue is masterpiece of insight. It is a very insightful work, and sureness of touch, fine discrimination, and subtle humor. This work is very, very humorous work, and all the characters gives unique value to Chaucer's picture of men and manners in the Englands of his time. So Chaucer was a satire with a mild touch. He was not harsh like his contemporaries, and he used very much use of humor to tell his point of view. The poet's plan had was a large one, but he lived to complete a small portion of it, merely a fragment of 24 tales. The tales differ widely in the character by whom they are told. So, different personality, they have come from the different background. They are different personalities, and they tell stories according to their personalities. The tale are not original in theme. Chaucer's taken his raw material from many different sources. Chaucer has quick eye for anything and everything. So the Knight's Tale is also Chaucer's finest work. Now Chaucer has taken this idea of Canterbury Tales from Boccaccio, Italian and great Italian writer, and Boccaccio has written Decameron, upon which Chaucer has based his Canterbury Tales. Now, general characteristics of the Chaucer's poetry. Chaucer was not a poet of the people, he was a court people. So he was a aristocratic person, he was a rich person, he was a diplomat, he was living with rich people, not with the common people. And Chaucer wrote for cultured readers and for refined society because he belonged there. The great vital discourse of the day never inspired his verse. So he do not use refer this peasant revolt in his work. Even if he refer it, he refer with the jest. He made this appeal to the favored few because he favored by this rich people, and he couldn't go against them, and he wanted to be amused by the comedy, and he was using his art to entertain these rich people, aristocratic people who were patronizing him. So Now they did not wish to be disturbed by the reminders of the plague and the famine, so we do not get references of these disasters in Chaucer's work. Thus, though he hold a mirror of the life of his time, though he is a representative poet of 14th century, the dark underside of it is nowhere reflected by him. Now, he is called the morning star of the Renaissance because he was at the beginning of the Renaissance when Italy was having the sunrise of Renaissance. Chaucer was there in England, but he traveled Italy and he got the glimpse of that Renaissance there. And Chaucer mastered the difficult 14th century English and made it easier. So at the time of Chaucer, there was four dialect was there, and Chaucer chose East Midland dialect and made it easier for the people. Therefore, he is also called the father of English poetry and father of English language also. So that was the age of Chaucer. I have made separate video on the Canterbury Tales also. I will give the link. Apart from this, I have made many Hindi and English videos in the age of Chaucer. You must go through that. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe my channel.